When I was erased by the system, George was by the side of the sick female protagonist, showing concern and care. It wasn't until the next day, when the female protagonist had recovered, that he suddenly remembered I was still locked in a dark basement. "Has Monica realized her mistake?" he asked the butler. Trembling, the butler replied, "Monica has indeed passed away." Chapter 1. George, don't go. I held onto his back tightly, refusing to let him leave. George is the passionate and critical second male lead in the CEO novel. He and the female protagonist grew up together since childhood sweethearts. George loves the female protagonist deeply and always believed that she loved him in return. However, he never expected that their childhood connection couldn't withstand the arrival of the male lead. The female protagonist quickly fell in love with the male lead. Unable to bear this blow, and unwilling to hurt the female protagonist, George directed all his resentment and pain towards himself, gradually becoming dark, mad, and cruel. 7 years ago, I transmigrated into this book, tasked with winning over George and making him fall in love with me. In order to complete my mission, I wholeheartedly accompanied him, comforted him, and redeemed him. I helped him overcome the pain of losing the female protagonist. He once promised me that he would try to love me. Today is the deadline for me to win over George. Just as he was about to give up on the female protagonist, he received a message mistakenly sent by her to the male lead. "I'm sick and feeling terrible." Without any hesitation, he was determined to go to the female protagonist. No matter how desperately I pleaded, he remained unmoved. "Monica, let go." George's voice was cold and emotionless. "Don't forget, you're just a substitute. In Anne's eyes, you're worthless. But you promised me that you would love me." I couldn't finish my sentence. He roughly pushed me down to the ground. "Know your place." George dropped those words and callously stepped over my body, ready to leave. "George," I desperately climbed up from the ground. In a disheveled state, I clung to his leg, abandoning all dignity and pleading desperately, "Please don't go. If you go, I'll die." "Ha!" George laughed mockingly, his cruelty evident. He said, "Monica, what's the matter? If I leave, you'll commit suicide?" Even if you commit suicide, it won't threaten me." George didn't listen to any of my explanations. "To me, you're nothing more than a pastime." With one swift kick, he heartlessly sent me tumbling to the ground. "George, tie her up and lock her in the basement." George coldly ordered, "Let her reflect on her actions. What exactly does she think she is?" I was bound by the servants inside the villa, helplessly watching George's figure disappear in haste. Chapter 2. The basement was pitch black. This was the place where George would lock himself whenever he had an episode. Because his love for the female protagonist ran too deep, whenever he started thinking about her, in order to restrain himself from going to her, from engaging in extreme actions towards her, he would lock himself up and indulge in self-harm. Every time this happened, I would accompany him, protect him, and prevent him from harming himself. Unable to find release, he would unleash all his cruelty on me. Almost every time, I would lose half my life before he calmed down. I spent 7 whole years by his side in such days. They say that a person's cells undergo a complete renewal every 7 years, so forgetting someone takes 7 years. I suddenly laughed, a laugh tinged with sadness. Host George has arrived at the female protagonist's house and taken her, who has a high fever, to the hospital. The mission to capture him has failed, and I am about to end your life. The system emitted a prompt sound. I responded. "You still have 2 hours. Perhaps there is still hope," the system said. "As long as George returns to your side within 2 hours, the mission will not be considered a failure." I shook my head. It wouldn't happen. George will always stay by Anne's side. No matter how hard I try, I can't warm his heart. I'm not giving up on myself. This is the reality. At midnight, as expected, my soul left the original host's body. I thought I would simply disappear. After all, being a capturer is already God's favor, giving us a chance to live. There won't be a second time. But my soul continued to float in the air, not dissipating. The punishment for a failed mission is for the soul to remain in this world until the person being captured dies. The system noticed my confusion and told me, "Host, I'm leaving now. The next host is waiting for me." After the system left, there was only my lonely soul left. Uncontrollably, I drifted into the hospital, into a ward. I saw George again, his affectionate gaze fixed on the sleeping and throughout the entire night. He stayed by her side, never closing his eyes. Afraid that if he did, and would disappear. Afraid that he wouldn't have another chance to look at her like this. After and woke up, she was surprised to see George. "Why are you here?" "You sent me a message." George's eyes flickered with disappointment. But he didn't get angry. Instead, a faint smile appeared on his lips. I'll let Harry know." "Thank you." George called Harry. The moment he left, George and called out to him. George froze. He was nervous. In front of the female protagonist, he was always so cautious. "Monica is doing well. Live a good life with her," and said with a smile. George nodded. But from the wounded look in his eyes, I could clearly see that no matter how well I do, I will never be as good as Anne. He just doesn't want Anne to have any psychological burden. After George left the hospital, he returned to the villa. The villa was so quiet. He sat on the couch for a long time. Presumably, he was trying to calm down, to stabilize his emotions after seeing Anne. It wasn't until noon, 12 o'clock, that the butler cautiously reminded him to have lunch. He snapped back to reality. Then, he casually asked, "Has Monica realized her mistakes?" Chapter 3. The butler replied, "Monica is still in the basement, and she hasn't pleaded for mercy. And she hasn't caused any trouble." George raised an eyebrow. "No. Monica has been very quiet," the butler respectfully said. "Young master, should I go and ask Monica now?" "No need," George said coldly. "Let's see how stubborn she can be." The butler dared not say anything more. I laughed mockingly from above. I have to admit that I have no dignity in front of him. When I was chosen by the system to enter this book as a capturer, I was well aware of my status and position. I knew that if I couldn't capture George, I would die again. And someone who has died once cherishes their life even more. So, in order to get closer to him more easily, I made the original host look somewhat similar to the female protagonist and intentionally bumped into the car he was driving. I also fabricated a backstory of my parents' death, doing everything I could to stay by George's side. In fact, in the original text, there is no such character as me. In this world, there is only me alone. Rather than saying that I'm capturing George to be able to live again, it's more accurate to say that I hope to have a true family while I'm alive. To have someone who truly loves me. In my previous life, I was too lonely, too lonely. I truly gave all my sincerity to love George, no matter how much he looked down on me, no matter how much he loved the female protagonist. Even if he did things to hurt me, in the end, I would choose to forgive and tolerate. There was even a time when I couldn't distinguish whether my love for him was mixed with ulterior motives. For a while, I almost forgot that I was on a mission, if not for the occasional alarm from the system. All I knew was that the moment he insisted on going to be with the female protagonist, it felt like a knife through my heart. I watched George sitting at the dining table, as usual, calmly having his lunch, elegant and indifferent, his heart calm as water. In his eyes, I didn't need any coaxing. Anyway, soon I would go to please him again, as if nothing had happened. Just like every other time. I suddenly remembered half a year ago when the female protagonist and I fell into the water from the yacht. In this book, there is also a malicious supporting female character who uses various means to harm the female protagonist. When she deliberately pushed the female protagonist into the water, I reached out to save her. But in an instant, we both fell into the water. The female protagonist couldn't swim, and neither could I. When the male protagonist and George noticed, they immediately jumped into the water, both swimming towards the female protagonist without hesitation. I watched them getting farther and farther away from me in the water. At that moment, I thought I was going to die. Fortunately, a lifeguard saved me in the end. But after being rescued, I remained unconscious for a long time. When I woke up again, I saw a hint of guilt in George's eyes for the first time, even though he didn't say anything. I didn't utter a word of reproach either. But he did treat me better for a long time after that. If it weren't for this mistaken message from the female protagonist, perhaps we would have become closer and closer. With a slight sense of regret in my heart, I suddenly wanted to know what expression George would have when he saw my lifeless body. Probably just an indifferent face. Chapter 4. The night was unusually quiet in the villa. Inside the study, George habitually dealt with some work in the evenings. After losing the leading lady, he spent a great deal of time on his work, and as a result, his career flourished remarkably. It reached a level that the main character couldn't even compare to. As he typed on the keyboard, his hands suddenly paused. Then he stood up and walked towards the French windows. Outside was pitch dark, but he stared for a long time. After a while, George took out a cigarette and lit it. Because I've been by his side for such a long time, because all his thoughts are focused on him. I can even perceive his emotions in his ordinary actions and subtle expressions. At this moment, he was clearly more restless than before. Is it because he met the leading lady and his emotions are still turbulent? After finishing a cigarette, he lit another one. Someone knocked on the door. "Young master, come in." The butler entered with a cup of hot milk and a plate of cookies. "Young master, have something to eat. Did Monica send you?" George asked sarcastically. "No," the butler denied. "Monica has been silent in the basement. I suddenly remembered that she used to bring you a late-night snack every evening, so I took the liberty of bringing it to you." I could see a hint of irritation in George's eyes. "Young master, Monica personally made the cookies 2 days ago. She failed many times but finally made them overnight. Please taste them," the butler added. "Take it away," George ordered without even glancing at it. "Young master, don't you understand what I'm saying?" "Yes." The butler quickly picked up the milk and cookies that he had put down, and when leaving, couldn't help but say, "Monica hasn't eaten or drunk anything in the basement for almost 2 days. I'm worried about Monica. That's her problem. If she starves, it's her own fault." George said angrily, "Since she wants to defy me, I want to see how stubborn she can be." He added fiercely, "No one is allowed to go to the basement without my permission." "Yes." The butler, seeing George so angry, dared not say another word. He could only leave respectfully. After he left, George forcefully extinguished the remaining half of the cigarette, then returned to the computer as if nothing had happened, and continued to work as usual. He really doesn't care about my life or death. Why should I expect any reaction from him after I'm gone? I should have given up long ago. The night grew deeper. However, George seemed to have no intention of sleeping. He tugged at his tie in frustration. He tugged several times, but it wouldn't come off. When I was still here, I took care of his every need. The night before, I would prepare suitable clothes for him based on his schedule for the next day. After he got out of bed, I would assist him with washing up, getting dressed, and even tying his tie. 7 years of meticulous care. Has he become incapable of taking care of himself? At this moment, it was evident that his neck was turning red from the tightness of the tie, yet he didn't loosen it. In his frustration, he kicked the chair. As the chair made a loud noise, the phone suddenly started ringing. Without checking the caller ID, he answered with a serious tone. "Hello, I'm Anne." The leading lady's sweet voice came from the other end. I saw George's mood instantly change. The previous restlessness and anger vanished. In his eyes, tenderness was evident. Chapter 5. In front of the leading lady, George never showed any signs of temper. All of his bad temper was directed towards me. Even when he was heartlessly abandoned by the leading lady back then, he silently endured it. No matter when, as long as the leading lady wanted to see him, he would go even if it meant risking his life. "What's wrong? Is something happening?" Anne asked with concern. "Nothing." George's voice softened, and he instantly became calm. He changed the subject. "It's late. Is there something you need from me?" Before the leading lady could speak, he nervously asked, "How's your health? Are you still having recurring fevers?" "I called to tell you that I've been discharged from hospital. The doctor said there's nothing serious, Just some fatigue as an after effect of the cold. I'll be fine in a few days. Take good care of yourself, George advised. I know, Anne replied with a smile. She expressed her gratitude, saying, You were in such a hurry today, I didn't get a chance to properly thank you. George tightly held his phone, remaining silent. I know all too well that the reason he left so decisively was because he couldn't bear to be with the leading lady for too long, as it would only make it harder for him to let go. And he didn't want to cause any trouble for the leading lady. He would rather endure all the pain himself, or release his frustrations on me. By the way, and suddenly remembered and quickly said, Tomorrow is my 26th birthday. I hope you can come to my birthday party. George's grip on the phone tightened even more. I didn't plan on having a birthday party, but Harry insisted on celebrating for me. Will you be available? And asked. I'll be available, George's low voice replied. That's great. Tomorrow, remember to bring Monica with you. Last time, she almost drowned while trying to save me from the sea. I haven't had a chance to properly thank her. Okay. George hesitated for a second, but still agreed. How could he refuse the leading lady's request? Even though he didn't want to see me at all. It's getting late. Rest early and see you tomorrow. See you tomorrow. George hung up the phone. He kept staring at Anne's incoming call for a long time, even after he had put down the phone. In reality, I should have given up a long time ago. Not to mention the difference in George's gaze when he looks at the leading lady. Even if he sees her name, it's filled with deep affection. What am I after 7 whole years? I watched as George remained in this state of hesitation for a long time. The screen went black. Suddenly, he walked out of the study. Uncle Wong, he shouted loudly. The butler quickly came out of the room and looked up at George on the second floor. Young master, here I am. Go tell Monica that if she admits her mistake and promises not to be jealous or cause trouble unreasonably anymore, she can be released. Yes, the butler quickly agreed. I laughed. Hovering above George, my laughter was filled with irony. George, I can't promise you anymore. After you've hurt me, I can't pretend everything is fine and try to please you. Now, all that's left of me is a cold, lifeless body. Chapter 6. George returned to the study. Most likely, the leading lady called him, and now he seemed noticeably calmer. He casually moved the mouse, and his mood seemed to have improved. Wait a moment. The butler knocked on the door and entered. I saw the panic and even fear in the butler's eyes. He must have discovered that I had died. Young master, the butler hesitated to speak. He probably didn't know how to say it. Is Monica behaving? George casually asked him. Monica. What? Is she still throwing a tantrum? George sneered, his eyes filled with irony. No, young master. You tell Monica that if she continues like this, not knowing when to stop, even if she starves to death in the basement, I won't care, George said harshly. The butler trembled, shivering as he said, but Monica, she's really dead. I saw a moment of panic flash in George's eyes. Just a moment. Immediately, all I saw was disgust in his eyes. What trick is Monica playing again? Does she think that by pretending to be dead, she can win my sympathy? Make me soften towards her? Young master, Monica really died. I just went to the basement and saw her. Her body was cold and stiff, the butler said excitedly. George stared at the butler intently. The butler earnestly said again, Monica really, truly died. It's impossible. George denied flatly. It's true. George stood up from his chair and walked out of the study in large strides. The butler quickly followed. He swiftly made his way to the basement. The basement was dimly lit. Standing at the entrance, I could only see myself lying on the ground from afar, still bound by ropes. After I died, I was forced to stay by George's side. This was the first time I saw myself after death. From here, I couldn't see anything clearly. It was as if I were just sleeping. Monica, stop pretending. George's voice remained icy. I'll count to 3, and you get up on your own. I can overlook what happened yesterday. I couldn't help but laugh. Even now, he still thought I was deceiving him. He still believed that if he extended a hand to me, I would obediently return to his side like a loyal dog. 1, 2. George's voice grew heavier, filled with anger. I remained unfazed. Monica, don't push it. George gritted his teeth. 3.
How could my body react?
George's eyes turned red. Was it anger? Because I resisted him for the first time. Young Master Monica. Really? Go tell her that if she doesn't come out tonight, she shouldn't bother coming out again. George threw out those words and turned around to leave. Such cold-heartedness. He didn't even spare a glance, didn't bother to confirm if I was really dead. My spirit followed George as it drifted away. I saw him return to the bedroom. The tie that couldn't be untied just now was quickly undone with a few movements, then thrown heavily onto the ground. He walked into the bathroom to freshen up. His shower was quick. After finishing, he habitually called out towel. After waiting for a few seconds, he directly took it down from the bathroom rack, roughly drying his body, then changed into his pajamas and lay down on the bed. He turned off the light, closed his eyes, and fell asleep. Soon, he fell asleep, and the sound of even breathing could be heard. Whether I live or die, it really has no effect on him. The next day, George's alarm clock rang. No one would press the snooze button for him, showing concern for how tired he was from work and letting him sleep for another 10 minutes. The alarm clock kept ringing. Monica, are you dead? In his sleep, George angrily shouted.
Yes.
I'm dead. Dead to the core. The alarm clock continued to ring. Finally, George couldn't stand it anymore. He sat up from the bed, grabbed his phone, and forcefully turned off the alarm. He turned his head, looking at the place I once slept. In that moment of wanting to explode, what came into his sight was an empty bed. The words on the tip of his tongue choked back, a slight movement in his throat, but he didn't dwell on it for too long. He simply lifted the covers and got out of bed. Chapter 7. After a quick freshening up in the bathroom, George walked into the walk-in closet. He spent a long time selecting his clothes, trying one outfit after another. Today, he was going to attend the protagonist's birthday party, so he wanted to dress up nicely. George wasn't conventionally handsome. He habitually wore wire-framed glasses, and his cold demeanor and dark personality created an image of a restrained and refined type. Quite captivating. He dressed in a black suit, standing straight in front of the full-length mirror for a long time. Still not satisfied, I watched as he unbuttoned and buttoned the first button repeatedly. Such back and forth. He impatiently tugged at his clothes a couple of times and walked out of the walk-in closet. As he descended the stairs, the butler was waiting for him at the staircase. Young Master, Monica. Still being stubborn, not that it's Monica. Leave her alone. If she wants to die, let her. George walked straight towards the dining table. He didn't even give the butler a chance to speak. The butler sighed. Reluctantly, he followed behind George, maintaining silence. After having breakfast, George left the villa. My spirit continued to follow him. He first went to the company, dealing with a bunch of work-related matters, constantly busy until the protagonist called him. George, haven't you arrived yet? And asked. At that moment, it seemed like he suddenly remembered that he was supposed to attend the protagonist's birthday party. He never used to forget anything about the protagonist. Now he must be filled with self-blame. I watched as he quickly responded. I'll be there soon. All right, we'll be waiting for you. After hanging up the phone, George swiftly drove to the protagonist's birthday party. He was really speeding the whole way. Even my spirit felt a bit afraid of being crashed into. Upon reaching the destination, the birthday party was lively. As soon as the protagonist saw George, she quickly walked over, holding the male lead's hand. George, you finally came. I'm sorry for being late, George said. This is your birthday gift. The birthday gift had been in George's car all along. It was something I had prepared for him. Every year, he would give the protagonist a gift, and I had gotten used to helping him pick one in advance. The protagonist took the gift, delighted, and quickly opened it. Inside was a dazzling crown adorned with sapphires. George had won the sapphires at the auction last time and casually mentioned that and would like them. I kept it in mind. Then I found the best jewelry craftsman to create this crown because the protagonist was about to get married. I thought that since George couldn't give her a wedding, she could wear the crown he gave her as she got married. Consider it a small consolation for his deep regrets. The protagonist was pleasantly surprised and exclaimed, "George, I love it. Do you know that? Harry and I have been looking at wedding crowns these past few days, but none of them were to my liking. The one you gave me is truly beautiful. Thank you, you always know what I love." I saw a hint of indescribable emotion flicker in George's eyes. I couldn't quite make it out, but I heard him suddenly murmur, "It was prepared by Monica." Well then, I must thank Monica properly. By the way, where is Monica? Why didn't she come with you? The protagonist asked in surprise. George suddenly fell silent. Suddenly, it had been a long time since he said a word. "What's wrong? Did you two have a fight?" The protagonist expressed her concern. "Monica would never be angry with you. Did you do something that hurt her?" Rarely, George didn't argue and remained silent. "George, Monica is truly the best person to you in this world. You will regret losing her for the rest of your life." The protagonist became somewhat emotional. Chapter 8. The protagonist is not bad, in fact, quite good. Because she feels indebted to George, she cares about me as well. She has always wanted to matchmake me and George. I have never seen a woman love a man to this extent, to the point of knowing everything about her love rival's preferences, the protagonist said, somewhat angry, probably expressing her indignation on my behalf. "George, just how much does Monica have to love you to tolerate your feelings for another woman, to tolerate your endless kindness towards another woman, and even help you be good to her? Indeed. Just how much tolerance is required? I don't know either. Initially, it was probably to be able to stay by George's side, so I would cater to all his preferences. Over time, it became a habit, and after a while, it's as if I loved him blindly. Blindly giving everything for him, blindly doing everything to make him happy. George, don't be so stubborn," the protagonist said with great seriousness. "Don't wait until you've truly lost her to regret it. Monica deserves you. Treat her with sincerity." Saying that, the protagonist put the crown that George had given her back into the gift box and returned it to him. "This crown is beautiful. You can tell at a glance that the person who made it put a lot of effort into it. I really like it and thank you. But this crown doesn't belong to me. It should belong to Monica." George looked at the crown in his hand, silent. "Today, I wanted to thank Monica in person. I also prepared a gift for her," the protagonist said, taking a small box from the male protagonist's hand and opening it. "This is the necklace I saw her looking at when Monica accompanied me shopping last time. The necklace is not very expensive, but she couldn't bear to buy it." George looked at the Tiffany's smiling necklace in the protagonist's hand. "Actually, I don't really like this necklace. It's just because it's called Smile. I can't remember the last time I genuinely smiled. Since becoming the target for capture, my everything has been about George, completely losing myself." "Did Monica ever let you buy something for her?" the protagonist asked George. George's body stiffened. Then he nodded. "You've been together with Monica for so long. Have you ever given her a gift? You're extravagant in your everyday expenses. But what about Monica?" "I really haven't seen her wear any designer clothes," the protagonist said, her words becoming more and more heartbreaking for me. "Even if she doesn't work and earn money, she's your girlfriend. How can you bear to treat her like this? How can you bear to let her suffer so much?" George's Adam's apple rolled. It's clear that he's suppressing his emotions. In a low voice, he said, "She has never asked anything from me." George wasn't lying. I indeed have never asked him for anything. He's not stingy. He just never thought about being good to me. That's why I feel even more heartbroken for Monica. She loves so humbly and cautiously, while you take all of this for granted. Monica is also a person. Just because she doesn't speak up doesn't mean her heart doesn't ache, the protagonist said passionately. I saw George's fingers, holding the gift box, trembling slightly. Is it because he's feeling uncomfortable being disliked by the protagonist? Chapter 9. George, the female protagonist, called out to him seriously, "Go back now and apologize to Monica." The birthday party will continue until the evening, and I hope you can come with her. George stood there, motionless, reluctant to leave, isn't he? After finally having a chance to see the female protagonist, how could he bear to leave? Moreover, it's all for someone like me, someone insignificant. I watched him hesitate for a long time. George, the female protagonist, became somewhat angry, truly frustrated. Fine, George agreed. He's afraid of upsetting the female protagonist, so he never refuses her requests, even if he's unwilling deep down. I followed George and left the birthday party. He returned to his own car, sat in the driver's seat, and didn't start the car for a long time. That's how reluctant he is, right? I thought he would just give up and go back, then find some excuse to come back to the female protagonist's birthday party, but he started the car and drove back home. He drove very slowly on the way back, a stark contrast to the way here, just like his current mood. After a while, George arrived at the villa. As soon as he entered the villa, he saw several people carrying a coffin inside. What's going on? George roared angrily. The butler hurriedly came out. Young master, it's Monica's body. Are you addicted to acting? George scolded angrily. The butler dared not speak. He probably didn't expect George to come back so early. According to past practice, going to see the female protagonist would take at least a whole day. Where is Monica? George asked.
She's
still in the basement. George walked directly towards the basement. This time, he didn't stand at the doorway, but went straight to my body. The ropes on me were gone. Presumably, the butler had untied them. After all, I'm already dead. What use is there for ropes? I saw George standing above my body, looking at my pale face and my stiff body. Monica, he called me, his voice still cold. I'll say it again, get up on your own, and I won't blame you, he said to my body. I laughed. Does he really think I can play dead? Or perhaps he casually threatens me, and even if I die, I have to get up and please him. Monica. George's voice was loud, echoing in the basement. The butler couldn't help but speak. Young master, Monica is really dead. She can't be dead. George stubbornly said she was perfectly fine. How could she die? The butler remained silent. I guess he doesn't know either. After all, my hands and feet were tied. It's impossible for me to commit suicide, and there are no external wounds on my body. Monica, didn't you want to marry me? George's eyes tightly fixed on my lifeless body. Chapter 10.
yes.
I want to marry him.